Jadakiss would love this fight because the champ is here. We have Dalcha Lungiambula, the former EFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champ, taking on Baby K. Karl Roberson, Glory standout. Matt, Glory fighters in MMA have had a lot of success in 2020. Just ask, I don't know, Alex Peje over with LFA. Watch out for that left hook. Just ask, Georgia's Giga Chikadze. Hey, having a lot of success at 145 pounds. Matt, Karl Roberson, unfortunately out of last weekend's scheduled fight against Dalcha champion due to COVID-19, but he will be in this weekend taking on Dalcha Lungiambula. And Matt, we went back and previewed this fight before last weekend. Then everything was lost in the fire, albeit I just deleted everything from my computer. So we'll start anew. But overall, I'm really excited about this fight. I mean, it is the definition of a striker's paradise because for Dalcha Lungiambula, he's a 4th degree black belt in judo. He competed for the Congo in the 2006, 2007, and 2008 games. He also competed at ADCC. He won the trials for Africa, and that was back in 2016. He is a 2nd degree black belt in judo, rather. And he's 35 years old. And Matt, the weird thing is he's moving down to middleweight for this fight. All things that concern me. But you know what doesn't concern me about this fight for Dalcha champion? The fact that he switched up camps, went over to the United States of America, and he is training with my favorite coach in all of MMA. I'm talking about a guy that hates right-handed sleeves. I am talking about Black Cobra Striking System's own Dewey Cooper. And Matt, we've seen Dewey Cooper in some pretty big corners. I know he's always out there for Kevin Lee and a lot of the guys that train out of Vegas. And whether you love him or whether you hate him, he is always there with his arm raised up, just hyping up these fighters. And we've seen a lot of tape from Dewey Cooper training with Dalcha Lungiambula. I was really, really worried about the weight cut, and I still kind of am. But Dalcha looks great in the videos that I've seen. Physically, he looks good. And you always worry about a guy like that. He's had a bit of a mixed bag so far in the UFC. A win over Daquan Townsend finishes him. And then the fight against Magomed Ankalaev, where it could have gone a lot of different ways. It was a lot of power punching from Dalcha Lungiambula trying to, break ground. And Magomed Ankalaev's kicks were really the difference maker in that one.
They were, and it is really weird when you look at how Dalcha Champ's UFC run's gone. Because, okay, you knock out Daquan Townsend. That's a thing that can happen. And then you lose to Ankalaev, who is at the top of the division right now. So basically, I know you're better than Maxi Kleber, but you're worse than Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's the kind of range that we're talking about right now. And it is hard to just put where his ceiling is exactly. Because Dalcha does a lot of things that are going to get him fans in the UFC. Does he put on fun fights? Yes, he does. Does he have insane finishes? Of course, all the time. And I like what you brought up about Dewey Cooper. He is going to help him sort of refine some of that striking technique because when you kind of think about Dalcha Lungiambula, you don't think about the judo credentials and how good of a grappler he is. Everyone knows him for the crazy knockout power and the phenomenal striking that he does have. And if he does hook up with a guy like Dewey Cooper, who can just sort of refine some of those techniques, it can make Dalcha a very terrifying fighter down at middleweight. The weird thing is, though, he's making this weight cut at the age of 35, and it is always odd when a guy does decide to move down in weight as opposed to up in weight. We've seen that it can help if you're a guy like Jared Cannonier. You can go all the way from heavyweight down to middleweight and just completely look like a different human, honestly. And for Dalcha, he has fought at heavyweight. He will be making this move down to middleweight. It's weird that they're making it against a guy who has missed weight at middleweight in the past. Ideally, you would think just make this fight at 205, make Dalcha move down perhaps further on in his career, or maybe not further on, just wait until the next fight. Because Karl Roberson, it's not like making 185 is an easy thing for him to do at this stage in his career either. So I just find it odd that they're deciding to do this one at middleweight more than anything.
I mean, it's Lungiambula's 13th pro fight, and it's his first one at middleweight. He's been a pro since 2014. He has wins over some recognizable names. Alain Badeau that we saw in the corner of Cyril Gane this past weekend. Yannick Bahati as well, that you kind of know and maybe love from the EFC scene. He's fought over in Europe as well. And Matt, I really took a lot of notes about the fight that he had against Ankalaev because it was the last time that we saw him out. And it was one where Ankalaev, southpaw, heavy on the lead leg was Dalcha champ, which is something that I worry about. And even in the training videos, he's really heavy and he kind of presses forward, throws a wild overhand right. Karl Roberson's a classically trained striker, and he excels against guys kind of like Dalcha Lungiambula. And I feel like if Roberson's going to have a lot of success, just chop down on that lead leg. You look at Roberson's last fight and his last loss, it was earlier on this year in, I mean, I'd say a rivalry because these guys hated each other, but with Marvin Vettori, who, again, top of the division at 185. And that's the thing with Karl Roberson. You look at the fights that he's had so far in the UFC. Well, he picks up the win on Dana White's Contender Series, which was the first season. Ryan Spann. Ryan Spann's pretty good at light heavyweight. I know he kind of tires in fights, but that was in the first round. And Ryan Spann's liable to go for double legs, stick with it forever, and get elbowed. It happens. So after Robertson beats him, he then fights Darren Stewart and finishes him in the first round, submits him. Karl Roberson isn't a submission specialist. Well, then he gets submitted by Cesar Ferreira. And listen, I get it, PFL's finest, but Cesar Ferreira is a pretty good litmus test, I guess.
Oh, 100%.
So Robertson, not time for the top 15. Cesar Ferreira beats him. And that was in the featured prelim of UFC 224, which was just a weird card in general. Robertson then fights Jack Marshman in a pretty high-profile fight. Beats him by decision. That's a good one. Then he moves up to 205 and fights one of light heavyweight's best in Glover Teixeira. Loses that fight. Beats Wellington Turman. Beats Roman Kopylov. Neither one of those wins really tell you a whole lot because Kopylov was 8-0 at the time. Uber prospect out of Russia. And with Wellington Turman, good prospect from Brazil, but we continue to see him making mistakes in the UFC. So for Karl Roberson, again, glory kickboxer, classic striker. And the one last thing that I wanted to say about Dalcha Champ, he can catch kicks, but it's kind of weird. And he's one of those guys that has traps like Triple H in 2003. And you don't need those for MMA.
I agree, actually. Being that heavily muscled in MMA tends to be a detriment. And this is a question I get a lot from like my extreme casual MMA fans who are just kind of asking about the sport to be friendly. They go, why aren't MMA fighters built like bodybuilders? It's not beneficial at all. When you are that heavily muscled, I'm going to have such a Joe Roganism right now. When you're built like that, you tend to get tired fast. And I know people hate bringing it up, and guys like Tyron Woodley disagree with it, but it is the truth. If you have muscles, they need oxygen.
The mitochondria in the cells, Matt.
Yes.
They got to get the energy.
Exactly. Now, if we are dealing with the force, maybe Dalcha goes out there, hip tosses old Karl Roberson, and that'll be the end of the fight. It's weird, though, when you look at Karl Roberson, he struggles with more physical grapplers, and if Dalcha wanted to employ that game plan, he'd be more than capable of it. It's not how he fights MMA, though. It is very odd. Dalcha will play Karl Roberson's game, even though I do think he has the skills to beat Roberson. If he decided to make this a more grappling-heavy fight, even though Dalcha should be a more technical fighter since he has started training with Dewey Cooper, who's a phenomenal boxing trainer, I just don't think it will be enough to get him over the ledge and get him over the level to make him a threat against Karl Roberson on the feet. Because Karl Roberson, we've seen him struggle with grapplers. No one's made him even really break a sweat in the stand-up in the UFC. He has some of the better kickboxing you're ever going to see. And yes, his record is a little salty. He's got some less than great wins in there. But Karl Roberson's going to be able to outstrike 99% of the people he fights in the UFC, and I really like him in this fight.
And I mean, Matt, you never know how the COVID could affect a guy, especially like Karl Roberson. I mean, look at Eduardo Rodriguez with my Boston Red Sox, lost the whole season due to complications, and Cody Garbrandt as well, really falling out of the picture at 125 pounds. So that fight scrapped last weekend. Now we get it this weekend. Apparently, you can get over it in a week and you're not contagious anymore. I'm not an expert. I don't know. It doesn't seem smart. But in this fight, Matt, Karl Roberson opened a minus 170 favorite. He's now minus 269. And for Dalcha Champion, the underdog open plus 145. He's now to plus 216. If we have a look at the Topology votes, 531, so it's a limited sample size. 70% of fans going Karl Roberson. 59% of fans picking him to win by decision. Matt, are you in agreement with the odds makers and the fans in your brain?
Yeah, again, it's really hard to pick against the more technical guy out of these two, and the fact that Dalcha is a primary striker when it comes to MMA, I know his background is more grappling heavy, but he fights like an MMA striker. It's going to be really hard to beat a guy like Karl Roberson, especially Dalcha does crash forward a lot, and with Karl Roberson, we saw with Gabriel Benitez versus Justin James, if you do crash forward and you're facing a guy who is really technical on the feet, he can throw knees to the body, he can catch you with elbows on the way in. I just like a lot of the ways that Karl Roberson can keep Dalcha off of him. For that reason, it's hard to pick against Karl Roberson.
Matt, I'm going with Karl Roberson in this one as well. Now, it is a tricky one, and with a guy like Dalcha Lungiambula, I mean, he has staying power. I don't know how that'll work out at 185 pounds, and you got to worry. A guy who's had 13 pro fights, or this is his 13th pro fight, fought at heavyweight and light heavyweight. He's 35, and it's like, well, we'll just go down to middleweight, move to the States for a little bit, train with Dewey Cooper, and hope things work out. I hope it works out. I like watching Dalcha Lungiambula. I think he's a great fighter, and if he picks up a win here, that's huge. Matt, so we're both going with Karl Roberson to pick up the win, and hey, this is a great card headlined by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and the man himself, Jeff Neal, hands of steel. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.